Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video I'm really pleased to be taking a look at MSI's MEG B550 Unify. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so today's video we'll be taking a look at MSI's MEG B550 Unify. Finally, a motherboard with not enough letters to pronounce. Excellent, I love it. So from now on, I'll just refer to this probably as the Unify or the B550 Unify. Very, very simple, no pro Wi-Fi VDHs or anything like that. I like it already. So today's video, we're taking a look at this board, going through, doing an unboxing, go through the accessories, go through all of the motherboard connectors, all the features, all that kind of stuff. Then we'll go through and discuss those features, and at the end I'll sum up with my kind of final thoughts. Now I won't be doing a full review on this, such as VRM testing, temperatures, all that kind of stuff. That will be coming a little bit later, because this board is actually going to be replacing my main video editing PC's motherboard, which is currently the Asus X570 Tough Gaming Wi-Fi. So that's coming out, this is going in, and I'm really, really excited to get to grips with this. It's a fantastic looking board, and I managed to pick this up at an absolutely brilliant price. Now, it was a kind of open box from, I think it was CCL or someone like that. I managed to pick this up for £120 in the UK, which is a massive saving. Even the kind of cheapest ones at the moment here in the UK were around about £200 for this board, so that is an extreme saving. Now, don't worry, I have already taken this out of the box and actually just put a processor on there just to make sure that it posts and boots, etc, etc, and it appears to be absolutely fine, so hopefully it should be brilliant for going into the video editing PC and not cause me any great headaches. So anyway, that's enough about me. Let's take a look at the board. So as you can see, first of all, obviously MSI MEG B550 Unify, AMD socket AM4 motherboard, supports Lightning Gen 4, so PCI Express Gen 4 supported. And actually this has got a lot more PCI Express Gen 4 support than I actually originally thought it would have. I was kind of under the impression that B550, essentially you're looking at one M.2 slot and PCI Express graphics card slot, and that is it. But weirdly, I don't know how they've managed to do it. On this particular board, you've got 4 M.2 slots, yep, 4 M.2 slots, which is pretty insane anyway, but 3 of them actually do support super speed PCI Express Gen 4. It is dependent on the processor you're using, so let's get out of the way. First of all, a massive caveat to this entire unboxing process and any of the information I'm giving you, I'm going to be working on best case scenarios, so i.e. full support from the processor. Now, depending on what processor you're using, depending on how many PCI Express lanes it has available to share, etc, 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 yes, your mileage may vary, as they quite often say. If you want full details of this board specs in a lot more detail and far more accuracy than I could ever give, there will be links to the MSI site in the video description. And also, if you do want to pick one of these bad boys up for yourself, there will also be some affiliated links in the video description, so you're more than welcome to check those out. There's a locally link, which basically translates to the Amazon store in your local region. Anyway, that's enough shilling. Let's look at the rest of the specs. So as it says, AMD Ryzen support. So it's got 3rd gen AMD Ryzen desktop ready. This, as it stands at the moment here in the kind of the very, very tail end of March 2021, going into April 2021, pretty much all of the boards of these now, which are actually on retail shelves and in warehouses, will be 5000 series ready. So if you're thinking maybe get one of these, get ready for a 5000 series processor, going to be absolutely fine. And actually, even if it hasn't got the telltale sticker on there saying 5000 series ready, you don't have to worry about it, because this board has the legendary MSI BIOS flashback button, so you can quite easily download a BIOS, stick it in the USB slot, push, press a button, and within 5 terrifying minutes, your BIOS will be flashed and ready to go. And if you want to find out how to flash the BIOS on this particular board, you can check out the link up here, and we'll go through that in great detail. So for those of you that are planning on a Unify, or actually any of the MSI motherboards that support BIOS flashback, then I'll go through that step by step for you. So anyway, back to the board. So yeah, B550 chipset, PCI Express Gen 4 ready, graphics and NVMe only, blah blah blah, AMD Crossfire, yada yada yada, etc. Taking a look at the back of the box, nice picture of the board itself, and to be honest with you, this is such a beautiful board, it'd be actually hard to take a bad picture of it, to be fair. Also as well, it shows you the rear I/O, which in itself is pretty awesome also. Goes through the specifications, which we'll try and get you some close-ups of a little bit later, and also we've got some of the core features. So the main things that this board, the Unify, is looking at is things like cooling, overclocking, and basically it's just a demon. It's got pretty much everything you could want in an X570 chipset board, but with a little bit less price and obviously running B550. So if you don't really need X570 chipset, this should tick most of the boxes, and it's got certainly tons and tons of headroom. You've got a multi-layer PCB for the motherboard, so all the tracks are nicely separated. Also, when it comes to memory on this thing, the memory tracks are absolutely brilliant, and you can get crazy speeds on this board. Now, they do say that by JDEC or XMP profiles, you can get up to like 5100 megahertz on your DDR4 RAM, which in itself is kind of insanity, and you'll actually struggle to buy those off the shelf. But it will actually overclock further than that. One of the guys at MSI actually managed to overclock this and create a world record back in the day, and he was getting in excess of 6000 megahertz on the RAM. And this is on the Unify version, not the Unify X version. And for those of you that are kind of looking at this and thinking, do I want this board or do I want the Unify X? Essentially, the biggest or the smallest details between them is essentially the Unify X has 2 memory slots rather than the 4 which is on this board. So if you've only got 2 slots, basically it means you can have much better signal to CPU. So the signal strength is better, overclocking is better, all that kind of usual stuff. So the Unify X is the kind of the cream of the crop for overclocking, but for most modern everyday users, I think the standard Unify version with its up to 128 gigabyte support over 4 RAM chips is going to be the better solution. Right, so let's take a quick look and see what we actually get in the packaging. There's actually quite a lot to get through here, so I'll try and do it as quickly as possible. So first of all, in this section here, now this is the antenna. Now the board actually has Wi-Fi and Bluetooth 5.1 built in. So we're looking at wireless 6 on here, and it comes with this kind of funky looking shark fin type aerial design with the MSI logo on it. So that basically just slots in, and then you can plug that into the back of the motherboard. There's bound to be some B-roll I've done of this already, so I'll show you that. But essentially it means that you can actually extend the antenna up and away from the back of the actual chassis that it's in. So say for instance like the PC behind me, you plug it in on the back there, that gives you roughly just under about 3 foot of length, so you can stick it on the top of your PC or put it to the side on your desk just to give you a little bit better Wi-Fi signal. But being that it's Wi-Fi 6, that shouldn't really be a problem. So this is going to support both 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz signals, and like we said, Bluetooth 5.1 also. Next up in the box is the actual board itself, and this thing is ridiculously heavy, so because of that I'm going to put it to one side and we'll take a look at that very shortly. Now we go on to the weird and wonderful. So MSI have never been one for being shy about trying new things, and try new things they certainly have. So in this particular board there is some crazy standoffs. So essentially what you can do with these, again there will be some B-roll of this so you can see it in action, but you can actually use these as motherboard stands. So if you want to have like an open test bench, then you can set these up as kind of little tripods, support the board on it about this high, so you can do things like testing, benchmarking. You can even actually put a fan underneath here as well. There's room for like a 120 or 140 mil fan. All the instructions are in the booklet. So if you want to go for some seriously extreme overclocking, you can have the board raised up off the deck, have a fan underneath it, blowing towards VRMs and all that kind of stuff to keep things cool, and towards the memory traces, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, kind of crazy, but kind of cool at the same time. The rest of it is pretty boring stuff, so we'll try and fly through this. So we get some SATA cables, a RGB extension cable, a J Corsair type RGB extension cable, and a 4-pin 12-volt RGB cable, which splits into 2, so you can plug that into the motherboard, and that gives you an additional 2 headers to add more things like lighting or fans, whatever you choose to be. Next is a rather stealthy looking MSI badge in black rather than the usual red, black and white, so yeah, that's quite stealthy and won't stick out like a sore thumb. That is the kind of ethos behind the Unify series. So they've designed it so that it's kind of not just over RGB'd crazy motherboard to drag customers in. They've basically taken away the stuff you don't necessarily need or want and just given you the features you actually do need, and they've done that in a particularly good way. There's a MSI brochure there, so they can try and claw some more money out of you. A set of SATA stickers for attaching to SATA cables, so you know what drive is which when you're ripping them apart. A thank you for purchasing MSI leaflet, how to join the reward program, and some other stuff. A book on how to assemble the stands for the DIY. So yeah, get an idea of what that is about. You've probably seen some B-roll. There is a m.2 screw. There's only one in there, it's been ripped open. Again, that is probably from the previous owner that had this before it's sent back or whatever. There is a quick installation guide, a loose m.2 screw, a user manual, and some more m.2 screws. So now it's time to take a look at the board itself, and as you can see, hopefully from this and also some of the B-roll, this thing is a monster. It's extremely heavy, so I'm going to try not to hold it in this position for too long. It will actually hurt my arms after a while. But you can see where a lot of that weight is coming from. So we've got this absolutely huge metal heatsink here, which also is connected via a heat pipe. It is just an insanely heavy board. It really, really is. So not only have we got the metal up there, also there's more metal. So we've got the freezer shield or whatever you want to call it for MSI, and these actually are all dual ones. So these are the new version which they've done. So essentially you've got the metal on the front there, and also behind it there's also metal as well. So on a lot of boards normally there's kind of like an air gap between the actual M.2 drive and the motherboard, but on these there's actually solid metal. Again, there'll be some B-roll of that so you can see how that all works. But essentially all of these work in a similar way. They've done a really clever thing actually with the M.2. So when you take the screws out, one of the screws is captive, the other one isn't. So there's no kind of mistaking which way round it goes. Obviously looking at it, you can kind of line up the lines. But if you're to take it off and you're doing it in a hurry and you're trying to put it back on, you'll find that physically all of these will only actually fit in one particular direction. So that's a really good point. So yeah, captive screws on the M.2's excellent news. All of them have got the new thermal pads in there as well. So I think there's like 7 kilowatt per meter transfers, whatever it is, I'm not entirely sure, I'll be completely honest with you, but essentially it's really good for keeping your M.2 drives nice and cool. So that is the same across all 4 of them. Again, the PCI Express Gen 4, Gen 3 thing is kind of a little bit mystical in the way it works. So starting off with the processor, if you've got a processor which supports PCI Express Gen 4, then you're going to have Gen 4 times 4 on your M.2 slot at the top here. And also you're going to have PCI Express Gen 4 times 16 in your top graphics card slot. When we start moving down a little bit further, that's where things start going slightly awry. So technically these next 2 slots will support PCI Express Gen 4. This one on the bottom, PCI Express Gen 3. They will also change depending what processor is in there. So kind of worst case scenario, you're looking at PCI Express Gen 3 times 2. Best case scenario, PCI Express Gen 4 times 4. Yeah, it is somewhat of a minefield, and I've read the manual through numerous times. I've actually double checked it on MSI's site, and actually one of their databases for the kind of, there's a download you can do to check out all the specs. That actually differs from the website, and the English website differs from the American website. Yeah, so it's very difficult for me to give you a 100% guarantee of what speed you're likely to get. And also because of the complexity of the different processors that you potentially could be using, that makes things even harder. But what I will tell you is very much similar to how B450 works, especially with M.2 is concerned. Depending on what slots you're using, you will find that some are shared. So for instance, if you're using M.2 drives in certain slots here, you'll potentially lose either 1 or 2 of your SATA ports, which is yeah, potentially a problem. Although realistically, when you've got 6 SATA ports and you've got 4 M.2 ports, that's a lot of drives no matter how you look at it. So potentially I would say realistically 8 is your maximum amount of drives, again depending on the configuration. Now both the M.2s and also the SATA supports RAID versions 0, RAID 1 and RAID 10. So options there to do various things with that. The PCI Express slots themselves, again, depending on what processor you put in, your mileage is going to vary on what speeds and transfers, etc, etc. Also as well, if you put in some of the M.2 drives, you potentially lose PCI Express times 1 slots. Yeah, it's a little bit murky, it really, really is. Like I said, I've read through the MSI website and I'm still pretty much none the wiser. I've got a rough idea of what's going on. If you're potentially thinking about buying this and you want more information, by the time this video's gone out and I've got to grips with it on my own system, I will obviously know considerably more about the board. So please do feel free to let me know in the either emails or the comment section. If you've got a specific combination you're trying to do, I will do my best to try and figure it out for you. But realistically, I would say the first thing to do is to head over to the MSI site to see if there's any updates on the specifications or the features. Anyway, that's enough of that. That took a long time. So let's start from the top of the board and we'll try and work our way around. So at the very top of the board, again, we've got this huge VRM heatsink cover. It's a 14+2 if I haven't said that already. And these are true phases. It's not doublers or anything like that. No crazy gimmickry going on, no parallel states. It's 14+2. So essentially a 16 phase VRM, which is pretty awesome. And it's certainly wipes out pretty much most of the other B550 boards on the market. The only other ones I guess would be something like the Aorus Elite, things like that, that do come quite close, but this certainly has a fantastic setup. And the chokes and all that kind of stuff, you're looking at 90 amp chokes on here, so it has got the potential to put an absolute crap ton of power through your processor. And that is kind of evident by the fact that at the top here, we've got two of our supplementary CPU power connectors. So you've got two 8-pin connectors. Although bizarrely, when I actually fired it up, I just used a particularly old chip, and I only used a single 4-pin on there. So if you're kind of thinking, well, I really like the board, I'm waiting for a 5000 series processor, I've got this junk ass power supply that I want to use, can I use an older processor and get it fired up? And yeah, you can. I used a Ryzen 3 3100, stuck it on there just with a single 4-pin, and it went in, fired up, and I managed to install Windows on the M.2. So yeah, you can get away with the bare minimum on this, but alternatively, you can go absolutely crazy, go to town, get yourself a 1500 watt power supply, and yeah, head for some world records. So moving across from there, we've got tons of connections up in this top corner. So first of all, we've got a PWM CPU connector, and then next to that, we've also got a pump connector and then an additional fan connector. So that's really nice to have those connectors all in that kind of area. So realistically, if you've got like a roof mounted radiator, you've got that covered, no problem at all. So pump, fan, CPU, etc., whichever header you want to use, you can do. All of those headers can be controlled in the BIOS using the speed fan setup, or actually in the Dragon Center. So you can pop in there, go into the monitor section and configure that to your heart's content. There's actually 8 connectors in total on here, fan connectors, which is a heck of a lot. I thought the gaming Wi-Fi behind me had a lot, but this takes it to another level. Absolute insanity. So moving down slightly from there, we've got the 4 RAM slots. As I said earlier, supports up to 128 gigs of RAM. Can get up to some crazy speeds, obviously CPU dependent. If you're using an older, maybe 2000 series CPU, which kind of technically does work, but mileage is limited what you can possibly achieve on that due to the way PCI Express works, etc., etc. So yeah, depending on what processor you put in there is going to be dependent on what your RAM will achieve. And other things such as XMP settings, different brands. If you want to be absolutely 100% sure, check out the qualified vendor listings in MSI's site. That is the best way to get total compatibility, or at least as close as possible. Moving across, we've got a really cool thing to see. So if you are into overclocking, then up here we've got a digital readout of all the BIOS states. So as it's booting up, it goes through the numbers, and I'll try and get you some pictures of that later, see what it looks like in real life. But that lights up red LED. Also as well at the bottom, there's a couple of buttons which light up red as well. So those really are the only things which actually light up on the board. There is a diagnostic D-LED as well, which also lights up. But as terms as RGB and any illumination go on the board, it is exceptionally minimal to basically that area and that is it. There's no addressable RGB physically on the board, although it does support it via add-ons and connectors. There's no RGB on the board whatsoever, so it basically is just this kind of dark black look, which I kind of like. So moving along, we've got some of the connectors there. So there is the J Rainbow connector, so that is your 5-pin addressable RGB connector, which is right on cue there. Next up, we've got the J Corsair connector, so again for certain Corsair devices you can hook that up onto there straight on. Next up is the Easy Debug LED, again really handy if you're doing things like BIOS updates or you've got issues where your system's not booting, so you can either use the D-LEDs or you can use those, use them both, whatever you want to do. But yeah, they got both bases covered there. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure whether they left the D-LED on there. They could have probably got rid of that and just had that, because that is far more accurate, because it gives you a much bigger, broader spectrum of potential BIOS failures or boot failures. So yeah, you can use either. In the MSI manual, you can look up all the codes on there and it'll tell you exactly what the problem is. So again, for troubleshooting and for fault finding, absolutely fantastic. So moving down, we've got our standard 24-pin power connector, as you'd expect. And then there is a USB Type-C connector for your case. So if you've got a case with a USB Type-C connector, you can hook that up there and connect up at the whopping 3.2 USB speeds. Absolutely great. Moving down, we've got our SATA ports there. So you've got SATA 3, so 6 gigabit per second connections. Again, yada, 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 etc., etc. PCI Express, m.2, you may lose 2 of those. So yeah, do be wary of that. Next up, we've got another system fan connector, another system fan connector, and then another addressable 5-volt RGB illumination connector. So for your fans, strips, all that kind of stuff, you can connect that up there. Moving down to the very bottom, so we've got our front panel connector, so that's your usual stuff like your power switch, reset button, etc., hard drive LED. And then next to that, at the bottom, we've got these really cool buttons. So if you are using this in a kind of test bench setup, you've got a really nice power button, nice little clicky button, and also there is a reset button as well. So if you want to, you don't have to put this in a case at all. You can actually just put it on an open bench and play around with it to your heart's content and not have to worry about front panel connectors, which is great. Next to that, there is a USB 3.0 connector. So again, that's for your front panel. So if you've got USB 3 on the front, then you can connect that up there. Then you've got a pair of USB 2.0 connectors. So again, for the kind of older legacy devices, you can plug those in for front or rear if you wanted to. I wonder whatever happened to those rear USB brackets you used to be able to get, which you could plug in and just put to the back of the panel. Don't really see those these days. They used to come with every motherboard, but anyway, I digress. So moving on, next to that, you've got another system fan header connector, another system fan header connector, and moving along slightly from that, you've got some RGB connectors and some other system connectors there, which you can connect up to various specific MSI devices. And something we don't see often on a motherboard these days is a PCI Express 6-pin connector on the bottom there. So if you are completely loading this thing up and you want to just give the system a little bit of extra juice, then you can connect up another connector there, which is, I can't really see many people doing, but I guess if you're a hardcore overclocker, then certainly the option is there for you. If you're not really getting enough juice from the top there, well, yeah, I guess that is for CPU, that is for the PCI Express. So yeah, ignore that. If you want to plug one in, plug one in. Moving along, there is a front panel connector for your HD audio. And HD audio on this is the AC1220p. So that is a 7.1 surround sound system. You also got SpeedIF support and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, MSI's audio is actually pretty good. The chokes on there are Nippon chokes, so good quality Japanese ones. MSI audio in general I find to be actually pretty decent. ASRock do a very good job as well. MSI, really good job. ASUS actually pretty good. Gigabyte I do find not quite as good in some circumstances, although I haven't tested out obviously every board. This is just going from my own personal experience, but generally I find MSI's sound profile and kind of noise floor to be actually pretty decent. Moving up from that, we've got a pair of pins there, so that is the JBAT connector, so that is basically your CMOS reset. Really you don't particularly need that anymore, because even though you've got the battery there, you can unplug it or take it out quite easily. You have actually got a CMOS reset button on the back of the IA, which we'll take a look at a little bit later. So moving up, there is some other things hidden away here. So there is a TMP connector, or your trusted platform module, so you can put that in there. And also there is another fan connector there, so for your rear 120 or 140mm fans or whatever you're plugging in, there is another PWM 4-pin there. Now like I said before, all of the fan headers on the board are all fully PWM or DC compatible. So if you're using maybe some Corsair 3-pin fans, or maybe you're using some up here 4-pin fans, whichever it may be, you can control them either in the BIOS or in the software. Generally what I find best on these boards is go into the BIOS and configure it manually. Normally set to auto, they don't always pick up exactly how they're meant to be, so I do like to go in there and choose those. If you want to see a video on how I select my settings on the BIOS on this board, let me know in the comment section below and we'll make that happen. Again, because I'll be using this in my main rig, chances are that's going to happen anyway, so yeah, you can either wait or let me know in the video description. So we'll quickly go back over the PCI Express slots, just for those of you that may have kind of missed it or didn't quite understand it, and to be honest with you, you're probably in the same boat as me, because I don't really understand it. But essentially what we've got is a PCI Express Gen 4 x 16 size slot, which will work at times 16. We've got a PCI Express Gen 3 x 1 slot, PCI Express Gen 3 x 1, and PCI Express Gen 3 x 4 slots, but times 16 sized. So again, that is best case scenarios. If you're using different processors, then those PCI Express gens may drop down. Essentially, most of this is aimed at 3000 or 5000 series processors, where it's a pretty level playing field. When you drop down to 2000 series, that's when things start getting a little bit weird and funky. But as far as the M.2s go, again, yeah, let's not go there. Basically, you've got 4 M.2 slots which support a combination of SATA drives and also NVMe. And actually, that is one of the things which changes as well. So not all of them support SATA and NVMe, so you do have to bear that in mind. Again, the instruction manual and the guide on the website do tell you what supports what. As far as I can remember, the bottom one and the top one are both NVMe only. I'm pretty sure those two will do NVMe and SATA, but again, it's dependent on processor as well. So yeah, it is a minefield. So before my arm snaps in its entirety, let's take a quick look at the rear I/O. Now the rear I/O on this is pretty darn spectacular. Now at the obvious normal retail price, you'd expect it to be pretty something special, and yeah, it doesn't really fail. So in the top corner you've got the clear CMOS button, and next to that you've got a BIOS flashback button. So nice clicky buttons, nice and easy to do. So yeah, we will be doing some instructional videos on how that all works. Next to that you've got your combination keyboard or mouse port, so you can use either on there if you wanted to. Then we've got a USB 2.0 port and also the USB 2.0 BIOS flashback port, so that's the one you need to use if you're flashing a BIOS. Then there's another USB 2.0 and another USB 2.0 followed by an HDMI 2.1, so that's going to give you something crazy like 4K at 120 Hz if you've got a processor that actually will put that out. So basically it's an APU, something like the, well, technically there isn't an APU that exists currently officially that supports this board. There is things like the 4650, 4750 and various others, but technically they're not really available to the open market. They're more kind of OEM chips. So it has an HDMI port and your mileage may vary. Next to that there's a bunch of 4 USB super speed ports. So these are 10 gigabit per second ports. You've got 3 type A and 1 type C, so nice to see a type C connector on the back there. You've got 2.5 gigabit LAN, so that is the Realtek RTL8125G chipset. Backwards compatible gigabit and 10100 if you want to use those, so yeah, no issues there. Actually a pretty decent chipset. I've used it before on a few devices now, it doesn't seem to give any problems whatsoever. Moving down we've got our Wi-Fi 6 antenna connectors, so again that's Wi-Fi 6, and also the AX200 chipset, which is plugged into m.2 key actually underneath the heat shield. Is compliant with Bluetooth 5.1 as we said, Wi-Fi 6, so yeah, pretty decent speeds as far as that is concerned. Moving down we've got the audio outputs, this for the Realtek ALC1220P chipset as we said earlier, so you've got the options there for obviously center speaker, rear speaker, subwoofer, etc, etc, and also a SPDIF connector if you want to hook up some kind of device that supports it. On the back of the board, not a great deal of interest here, but certainly tons of screws, so if you want to take things apart, move the frozzer bits and pieces for the M.2s, you can take all those apart, and also take off the back shield, all that kind of stuff. Also on the back there is it's basically a combination part, so this is also a strengthening bar to obviously keep the motherboard rigid because you've got a lot of metal in 2 areas, but also acts as an additional heatsink for the back side of the VRMs which are on the board, which will be in this configuration. So yeah, strengthens the board, keeps it more rigid, and also dissipates some of that heat as well, although obviously not a huge amount of heat because it's going to be behind your motherboard. Not a lot of airflow back there I wouldn't have thought, but certainly it's better than nothing. Okay, so I've finally given up and put this heavy sucker on a stand because yeah, it's just way too heavy. So overall, I've got to be honest with you, I'm actually really excited to put this in my system. I didn't want to do the review, I just wanted to put it on my computer and get on with it, as most of you probably do when you get your new stuff, which unfortunately is out of the question when you're an unboxer. So the next stage of this kind of whole process is to do some testing on my Asus board, get some benchmarks done, all that kind of stuff, then put this in, do some configuration changes, possibly do a fresh Windows install. It's always beneficial when you're moving from one motherboard to another to do a fresh install. It's not entirely necessary, but just to remove any kind of potential issues that may have been unseen with the board, being that it is a used board. So always recommend doing that. Fresh install, if you're buying any used parts, fresh install every time just to make sure that it is the actual component which is faulty rather than your installation of Windows which has got corrupted. So definitely worth doing that. So we'll be doing that. I am going to populate it with as many drives as I possibly can. I've already got 2 lined up, M.2 drives. I'm definitely going to put a 3rd one in to try and split down some of my video editing drive stuff. So that's going to be really cool. RAM wise, I'll probably still end up using what I've got in my system already, which is the V-Color Prism Pro, which is the DDR4 3600 speeds, which works really well with my Ryzen 9 3900X. So that is going to be absolutely great. And I'm just really excited in general. I am going to try and move over to the MSI ecosystem on that entire computer, so mouse, keyboard, the whole lot, just so I can synchronize the RGB, because, well, I'm sad like that. Anyway, this has been an overview and my thoughts on the MSI B550 Unify. Please do let me know in the video description what you think of it, what you think I should do with it. Would you buy one? Do you think I got a bargain at £120? I certainly think I did. So, I've been Mike, this is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the follow-up video. Thanks for watching.